All right, we are recording. Hello, everybody. Welcome on Monday. That's right. Yeah, today's Monday. The days all seem to run together now. I want to thank all of our wonderful faculty for joining us today, and we'll give them a chance to introduce in a moment. But this is Pre-Health Periodic Ponderings Research, Undergraduate Research 102, where we're going to be talking with a panel on undergraduate research. I'm Teresa Blackman. I'm the Pre-Health Professions Advisor. I'm one of the facilitators. And Gretchen is the other one.
I'm Gretchen Potts. Sorry, I thought I was supposed to talk now. I'm Gretchen Potts. I am the other facilitator. I am a professor in the chemistry and physics department and also a pre-med advisor. So I've been working with Teresa on kind of helping students this year find another way to get their shadowing hours or something in place of shadow hours. And that's why we're looking at research. And we invited faculty to this panel to get a really diverse cross-section across campus of different majors. We're not guaranteeing that they're looking for research students right now, but you may find an interest in their research and ask them questions today or later, so you can reach out to them and ask them questions. So I think what we're gonna do first, and we're gonna, because we have so many faculty, I'm gonna please ask that you stick to the 2-minute introduction on research, on your research, who you are and on your research. And then we have some questions that we will ask the faculty just kind of get things moving. And during that time, you're welcome to, the people in attendance are welcome to type questions in the chat, because we'll have open time at the end to ask questions. And so we can refer to those when we get to the end. So I'll start off. I'm just going to go alphabetically. So I'll just ask you to give your 2-minute introduction. So we'll start with Dr. Tammy Garland from Criminal Justice.
Hi, I'm Dr. Garland, and I am a professor in criminal justice in the Department of Social, Cultural, and Justice Studies. So when we talk about research, I always think about research as something that graduate students have historically done, but that doesn't have to be the case. I think it's important for both undergraduate and graduate students to engage in research. And so if any of you are ever interested in research, come find us, like Dr. Potts said. I think I started my research path a little late in life, but I really finally found what I love. And I always say your research, one, should fill your cup, first of all. Okay, don't pick research that you aren't interested in. So I pick research I do research that is near and dear to my heart. I do research on homelessness. I do research on drug policy. I do research on pop culture and crime, and we'll talk about that because that's a lot of fun. Talk about filling your cup. But I do varying projects. I do a lot of survey research. So, we in the social sciences, we are a bit different because we do a lot of surveys. We do a lot of interview questions, but we also do a lot of qualitative analysis as well. Is that what you want, Dr. Potts?
That's great. Thank you. Dr. David Giles, biology.
Hi, my research, I'm a microbiologist, so I study bacteria specifically. I do a lot of benchtop research. My students are exposed to many different types of assays. We do a little lipid biochemistry. I collaborate with faculty in chemistry, but my research aims are to investigate fatty acids, which are present throughout our environment. They can be specific to environments. We're learning that bacteria can utilize those fatty acids in many more ways than we thought were possible. And so I'm trying to determine how they're able to take up these fatty acids and remodel their membranes, how that can affect antimicrobial resistance, and how it can affect other phenotypes such as biofilm formation and motility, important virulence determinants for potential pathogens. And we've studied many different gram-negative bacteria. I'm always ready to dive into different, to other bacteria and give students a sweeping range of exposure to techniques in my laboratory.
Thank you. Dr. Bradley Harris, civil and chemical engineering.
So I'm Bradley Harris. I'm an assistant professor in chemical engineering here at UTC. My research interests are mainly in bioengineering, and that's been kind of why I got included in this really cross-suite panel. When I say bioengineering, that can basically, I'm trying to figure out how to utilize what's present in nature or the tools that are there for some of the pressing problems of today. That could be trying to come up with new routes to renewable energy. Most of our bulk chemicals come from petroleum, so we need new routes to those for a variety of reasons. And also, I've actually partnered with Dr. Giles on studying how bacteria adapt to their environment. Students in my lab can get involved in anything from doing the same assays that Dr. Giles brought up to figuring out how to design primers for genetic engineering to change the genome of something, to growing up cultures in the lab and figuring out how to separate it, or even doing computational biology where we're modeling proteins and membranes and understanding how they interact and what the consequences are. I work with a lot of different researchers in a variety of fields because of those types of things. So anything from neutron scientists, biologists, molecular biophysicists, kind of runs the gamut. And so there's a lot that you can get involved in my lab, and it doesn't necessarily have to be at the bench or, hands-on getting involved in that way. You can also be involved in designing code and figuring out how proteins behave atomic level. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Dr. Shwani Howard-Baptiste from HHP and Masters in Public Health Program.
Good afternoon. My students call me Dr. HB, affectionately, I'll say. So for me, my lab is actually the community. So a lot of my research talks and addresses interprofessional collaborations, lots of interdisciplinary work. So a lot of things that I look at are how do we engage communities, particularly minority communities, to have access to appropriate information around health education and physical activity and exercise. So lots of qualitative research, love talking to people, love going, having breadth and depth to understand why people do what they do and how we as a community can support communities making healthier decisions. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time if I mispronounce this. Dr. Erkan Kaplinglu from Engineering Management, specifically Mechatronics, I believe.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, your pronunciation is perfect. Thank you. Yeah, its mean is like son of tiger. The Kaplan means son of tiger. So yeah, usually my student call me Dr. K, which is short as well. So yeah, I'm associated professor in mechatronics program in engineering, technology, and management. Also, I'm director of BioAS lab, Biomechatronic Assistive Technology lab here in UTC. In my lab, we are working some smart prosthetics devices and orthosis devices. And also we work on for some rehabilitation robotic system. And we aim to mostly athletes and several pulse children. So we do some another design for surgical robotics, but we are in the beginning of this part. But now we have mostly working for biosignal based rehabilitation robotic system in my lab.
Thank you.
This is my first year, by the way.
Well, you've already made a name for yourself because you were recommended. So good job. Dr. Eunyoung Kim from Interior Architecture, Interior Design.
Hi, my research interest is investigating and specific design factors, design elements for the built environments. So, well, people might think what research for design, but from the environmental psychology field, I am very interested in learn how people react and perceive the built environment, because there's a premise that physical environment really can have impact on people's behavior and further their well-being. So that's my main focus. So my recent research is about patient's room for adolescents patients, especially the surgical patients. So when they have a specific physical condition, their emotional status might be different. So I collect their emotional status data, and then I ask them to showing certain patient's room design and get their response. So that is more subjective. It could be the very subjective data, but if, future I am working on what I'm working on to make them more valid data. So using EEG is the electroencephalography to measure of electrical activity of in some part of brain, so that we show the stimulus, they can do self-reported response, but also at the same time, we can measure their more quantifiable actual objective data, so we can get right response from the subject. So that's my main focus. And then in that kind of ideas can apply either, it could be the housing, residential place, it could be this learning environments. So big core interest is how the built environment can affect the people who live in that specific environment.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Dr. Carissa Pyer, Health and Human Performance.
I am Dr. Pyer. I will say I'm maybe the opposite of Dr. Garland. I did start researching as an undergraduate, but I only mention that because it has changed drastically. My first study as a junior, I think in undergrad, was looking at rowing, like a rowing machine, like you would row on the water, but in a lab instead, and how people learn to pace themselves. And so my initial research in graduate school was a lot with athletic performance. It's shifted a lot. My focus now is on physical activity promotion, and often more for inactive individuals and how we can help people become more active. So I work with in a couple different directions. I work with an after-school soccer program in town, and we do some program evaluations. So that's a lot of parent surveys and things like that. The main undergraduate project that I have is a peer health coaching program. So we train our undergraduates on how to discuss physical activity and motivations for health, and help people set goals to become more active. And then we're actually right now analyzing some COVID survey data looking at physical activity and the experiences during the COVID period, hoping that there'd be some tie with mental health and physical activity. Mental health is a kind of a side hobby of mine. I have no credentials in mental health, but we know that physical activity is really strongly tied to it. So I would say my overall arc is health promotion through physical activity, but on more of an individual, what does it actually take? Because telling somebody they are at higher risk for a heart attack is not going to motivate people to exercise. Otherwise, we would all meet the guidelines. That doesn't work. We're not rational beings about exercise. We are emotional beings about exercise. So my research is how do we help people harness that motivation to actually change behaviors.
Thank you. And I'm volunteer as a candidate if you need volunteers. Dr. Alexandra Zellin from psychology.
Hi, I'm also have my last name shortened Dr. Z to my students. Faith, who is on this call, is actually one of my students. So I'm in the psychology department. I am co-running the ISWAG lab, the Intersectional Sexism Workplace and Gender Lab. So we're doing a lot of workplace based upon sexism, sexual harassment, and gender-based research, both in and outside of the workplace. So Faith's current project is actually looking, so something also different. So I do workplace research, but I also do a lot of social psychological research. So Faith's project is looking at experiences with UTC police on campus, and how students of different races have had different interactions with UTC police. And she has noted some of her own friend stories that of these interactions, and we really think that there might be something there justified by the rest of what the universities are also finding. So that's one of the studies. So anything really that does or that deals with inside the workplace, outside the workplace, gender. For instance, I just did a Tinder study wrapped up last year, where we had 3 of our lab students actually join Tinder and swipe yes to 50 guys 3 times a week, and then recorded the first messages that they got, because we were hearing that they were all going to be terrible messages, and there was not as many terrible messages as one would think. So that's good, but there were still some not so great ones, and there was a lot of racism that was inherent in some of those Tinder messages too. So I'm really starting to take an intersectional view of, it's not just what are women's experiences, but how do Black women experience things different than white women or Latinx women or Asian women, et cetera. So really kind of taking that lens onto a lot of different life experiences.
Thank you, Alex. Dr. Zelen, sorry, Dr. Z. All right, so the next section we're going to move into, we have some preset questions that we're going to work through that I believe Teresa will be starting first.
I will. So what we'll do is we'll read the question, and we actually gave randomly a couple of faculty members each question. So after I read the question one time, then I'll let those of you that are answering that question do so. So we're not reading the question 7,000 times. So our first question is, what qualities do you feel make a good student researcher?
Oh, are you going to indicate who should
Oh
answer
yeah,
first?
I should do that. That would be helpful. Dr. Z, you are first on my list. So if you would like to answer first.
Sure. So I made a slight list when you sent out these questions, that way I would have definitely something to go for. So things I found that make a really good student researcher are students that are curious. As I believe Dr. Garland brought up, but I believe Dr. HB did too. I forget, other people have brought this up as well, but students who are curious, there's nothing worse than working on a research project or something you really can't stand, or that you really find out that you're not interested in. And so making sure not only are you curious, but you're curious about some of the things that your faculty sponsor or your faculty mentor is also curious about as well. Being a go-getter, so taking the initiative is always definitely something that's very important. But something I've also found of being a good student researcher is being open to failure. And that's something that's really hard, especially for a lot of people, because we are, told, especially in academia, like, yes, you always have to be, you can't fail. And there are some studies that aren't just going to pan out the way you want them to. And that's okay. But remaining, being committed to the research, being committed to the process, even though there will be bumps in the road, is also really important, as is being a critical thinker. So not just being a robot and doing as you're told, but okay, well, why do you have, these thoughts? Why are you making these connections? Why do you think that this particular thing is important? Being open to new ideas and ways of thinking is also incredibly key, as of being inclusive of all, because diversity is a must. When we talk about sciences, and especially with people sciences, the most common participants that we have are white, educated, Western people. And while that doesn't really represent everybody in the world. And so making sure that the research is inclusive, and we're making sure that we are taking into account more of a representative sample, or even focusing on more underrepresented samples is really important. So that to me is what makes a good student researcher.
Thank you. So we also posed the question to Dr. Yang, who is not on this call. So Dr. Harris, you are up.
Sure. So when I read this question, honestly, actually what I thought first was listening to students what is not required to be a good researcher. And that is prior experience or skills, or even much time in college yet at all. Some of the best students that I've had have been the ones that came to a talk that I gave their freshman year, followed up about that talk, and got the chance to work in my lab for 2 to 3 years at a time, because you're really able to accomplish something before you leave. And prior experience or skills is not a must either. Honestly, I want this experience to be something that helps you, that shapes your future career, helps you determine what you like and what you don't like. So for example, I've had students come in, maybe thought they were going to work as an engineer in the chemical industry for the rest of their lives, and now they're working for the CDC instead, or they're doing graduate school in a degree that's not even engineering, because they got exposed to some of that working in my lab. So that's, those are things that you don't need, but, just echoing what Dr. Z said, motivation. And I really think taking ownership and responsibility of something. It's no longer the professor's project or the grad student's project. And I'm just collecting the data. This is my project. I want it to succeed, and I'm going to give it everything I need to help it succeed. Those are always really important.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our next question. What are some of the more interesting topics you have researched, and what was your favorite? Dr. Garland.
Okay, I tell you, I do research that fills my cup. And sometimes we talk about research being objective in research methods. And I say hogwash sometimes to you all. Oftentimes what we do with research is based upon what we're really interested in, and don't do things that are boring. So I have had the great pleasure of being able to research homeless populations. And so me and a graduate student went out and we interviewed homeless people, both men and women, and looking at victimization issues and crime and things of that nature. And you know, some days I would leave and crying. It is really it's really emotionally taxing when you're sitting on a curb interviewing people and they're pouring their life out to you. I mean, you have to be professional, so you can't cry in front of them, obviously, but it's important. And I've also done very similar research. I got to go in jails last summer and talking about addiction of methamphetamine and opioids amongst rural jail populations, and trying to figure out the needs of how they would be successful in that once they were released. But my favorite, y'all, is pop culture. Okay, I'm a big geek, and I love all things pop culture, whether it's comic books or music or anything that relates to violence, especially violence against women. So probably my favorite project that I ever got to work on is I looked at, we did a qualitative analysis of the Walking Dead comic book series. If you're a fan of the show, that's great, but the comic book series is so much better. And so we were able to go through, you know, the compendiums and look for text and do a textual analysis of that. So what I challenge you all is to think outside the box when you're doing research, because it can be fun. It's not just ho hum, I'm doing this for a grade. So yeah, that's what I want you to do. And so, oh, you've looked at Superman's girlfriend. Oh, I like that, Dr. Z. Maybe we should talk one of these days.
I'm muted, of course. Thank you. Dr. K?
Yeah, can I share my screen?
Teresa, can you help make it so we can share?
Yeah. You know, as an engineer, I need to show something. We love to show something, not talking. So, okay.
Is it ready? Try.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
So let's show here. I think you see my screen right now. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, great. So yeah, those are my research. We working for hand rehabilitation system for stroke people. We working for some prosthetic devices, and we also work for especially for cerebral palsy kids for hippotherapy. That was my favorite one, and you will see in the right corner and bottom. So there we have one simulated hypotherapy horse. It's like the robotic system, but it's really acting like a real horse, because for the hippotherapy, the people cannot reach there every time for horses for hippotherapy. So that's why we designed this one. So many patient of us use this one, and also we have one the simulator, like the game. So while they're riding horse, they play the game also. But while they're using this robotic system, we collect their EMG data from their muscles. So after using this system, see that the kids has a good motivation, and they start to smile. So this is my favorite, because I put smile on my patient. I mean, our patients, our kids. So that's why this is my favorite. But then the top one in the corner, left corner, it's also very useful. We started use for Erlinger Hospital with this system. This is some kind of home rehabilitation system, hand rehabilitation system, which has also simulated part and game part. While you're using that, you play also one game to improve your flexion and extension movements in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Howard Baptiste.
Yeah, so my favorite type of research is anything that really involves students and allows for us to do some type of community collaboration. So my favorite project that I've done specifically here at UTC was on a dance program. So dance stands for Determining Adolescents' Needs for Culturally Appropriate Exercises. I love acronyms. I'm guilty of that. And so the dance program was at Eastlake Academy of Fine Arts. We also did that program at Orchard Knob Middle School. And really what it was an opportunity for students to take the lead. And so the Sugar Mocks, who are the UTC dance team here, I don't have a background in dance. I just have ideas and that I try to bring them together and make them happen. So the Sugar Mocks are a UTC dance team here, and they were responsible for providing the dance instruction to the middle school students. And originally it was designed for girls. And when we showed up on the first day, more than half of the students were boys. And so, as people have alluded to, part of research is being flexible and being able to adjust very, very quickly. And so the Sugar Mocks, again, all female dancers, had to quickly adjust kind of some of the techniques and different strategies that they were using to engage all participants. And so my goal is always how do we, I think someone had mentioned this earlier, how do we get students, I think Dr. Harris, how do we get students to take the lead? And so even though faculty may be the initial kind of brainchild, the goal is for students to take the lead, to take ownership. So I really enjoy presenting that type of data and research in formal presentations and also in publications. So that was my favorite research project.
Thank you. I had to remember to unmute myself. So our next question is, how do you approach bias in research? And our first faculty member is Dr. Giles.
Well, when I read this question, the first bias that I think of that I've been most exposed to, at least through training, would be experimental bias. And at the benchtop, we can account for bias and make sure that we're not biased in our experiments by using controls. And I'm sort of fortunate in my research vein. I guess it's fortunate. I don't have any direct competitors right now. There's not a huge amount of literature on what I'm exploring, but at the same time, it's a lot of pressure because what I put out, I want to be real. And so I try to impress upon my students the importance of making sure, having no expectations. That's first of all. I can always say, this is what I think is going to happen, but if they're with me long enough, we get surprised. So they understand pretty quickly that that you can't make assumptions of what's going to happen. You just try to ask the good questions and make sure that you control as well as you can for every experiment, so that you're not going one direction without enough data behind it. Another type of bias, I think, I'm guilty of this one recently. As I mentioned in my intro, I hop around between organisms. I have a focal organism, which is Vibrio cholera, but I jump around to other gram-negatives. I'm not an expert in all gram-negatives. So I put together a paper, and this is with Brad Harris, on Aeromonas salmonicida, which is just an aquatic organism that causes disease in fish. And when we submitted a paper which had the same main thrust as all of the other papers that I've worked on, they wanted a certain strain represented that I was not aware of, and I had not done enough research. I just got a type, what we call type strains for an organism, and just pushed forward without even thinking about it. And I was reminded in the reviews that there are some very important strains that cause disease that have special features on their surface that could affect our results. Our results were not invalidated, but we needed to explore this other strain, and that is now the topic of a new departmental honors student that I'm about to take on. We're going to get the appropriate strain and then make that paper better. Another type of bias that occurred to me was something that I've never been guilty of, and I don't know if I emphasize it enough with my students. When I was trained, it seemed like there were there were the best researchers, the best institutions, the places you were supposed to trust, and you had to, that's, if you're going to cite an article, go to Nature, go straight to Nature, go straight to certain journals of high impact. That, to me, is a bias that I try to tell my students. You need to do a thorough research, you need to do a thorough literature search across all journals, and you might find what you're looking for, and you can critique the paper, but it doesn't matter where it comes from. And so that's another important bias that I think comes up a lot during my research, and what I try to tell my students to really focus on doing a thorough literature search and not get hung up on names.
Thank you. So next in answering this question is Dr. Kim.
Yes, nature of my research is more social science that leads to data collection, research method is interview or survey, focus group, and observation. So the first thing I always trying to do is narrowing down my subject. If that is not general public, I always narrowing down what's my subject population. So for example, when I did my hospital patients rooms study, I narrowing down my subject age. I mean, my subject population is adolescents patients. So adolescents could be 12 to 21, 12 to 19, but I narrowing down my subject age and medical symptoms, so that I can only say, my result only say that specific patients group. That way I try to reduce my bias in my research outcome. And then, as you know, when you especially do the survey, as a bigger sample is a better representation of a subject population. So I'm trying to get more surveys done whenever I do the survey. And then when you do even an in-person survey or interview, sometimes the interviewer can bias these participant response. So trying to not to put any influence to the participant. So that's why often when I was in students, then I had to go through some training, to be objective when you read the questions to your participant. So that way we can reduce, that way I trying to reduce the bias in my data. And then also to enhance my credibility of the outcome. So I'm trying to do multiple data collection methods. So at least two. So one could be quantitative, like survey, and the other one could be qualitative, is interview or focus group, so that we can put together my data is not skewed in either way. I think that way I try to reduce the bias in my research.
Thank you. And then Dr. Pyer.
I teach our research methods class, so I could talk about bias all day. So I'm going to time myself so that I don't. So I work with physical activity, and we do have objective monitors that can measure physical activity, although there's a lot of discussion over how we best process that. And that's not as objective as most people might think it is. But I do a lot of survey research. So I mentioned the COVID student survey we did this summer. We asked people to self-report their physical activity, and we run into the issue of social desirability bias. People will tell us they are more active than they actually are. In other health areas, you tend to tell people you drink less than you actually do, or smoke less than you actually do, and get more sleep than you actually do. So there are some approaches with certain surveys for how you exclude maybe unlikely responses. We had people this summer tell us they were doing 8 hours a day of vigorous exercise. That seems unlikely. So we have methods for truncating that and bringing it down. I also talk a lot to my students about publishing bias and how we often see things get published if the results are more exciting. So especially in exercise interventions, I can run a study and nothing changes, or exercise changes, but the other outcome doesn't. It can be hard to get that published, which leads to this idea from people looking at the literature that exercise interventions always work. But really, those are just the ones that get published because they're more exciting. And then, as others have talked about, the idea of a representative sample. is certainly important, and either trying to get it or acknowledging that you didn't have it. And so in smaller studies saying, you know, this is what we found in this sample. It doesn't mean it's this way for everyone. You know, even our survey this summer, we did not get a representative sample based on race of UTC students. It was an overwhelmingly female sample, and we were looking at stress during COVID. So people were probably more likely to respond to that survey if they felt stressed during COVID. So sometimes it's acknowledging that your sample might not be representative to acknowledge the bias if you can't exclude it.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to, what is your approach to developing subject criteria for your research, Dr. Garland? You're on mute, Dr. Garland.
I love it. Drawing on what Dr. Kim talked about subjects, it's really important to identify what subjects you have, because that will sometimes determine who specifically you're looking for. And oftentimes, sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes we realize that we are limited. You know, social science data research is sometimes a little tricky, because sometimes you have to draw on who's available. And that's a convenient sample. I typically like to draw more from a purposive sample, because I feel my research is more informed that way, but that's not always possible. So I'm trying to look at a specific population, especially when I'm doing interviews or survey research. But what I get a little testy about is when people do qualitative research. And yes, you can do small samples with studies in qualitative research, but for instance, I was reviewing for a journal probably about 6 months ago, and they were looking at homeless population. Well, I've done research on homeless population, and it's time consuming. And when they tell me that they can only get 6 people, 6 women to look at, I'm going, yeah, that's not really true. You basically didn't. Sometimes it takes a while. If you want a thorough population, it takes a while to get a sample. So you have to look at time and space. I always tell my students about time and space. So we are looking at places where you're getting it from and the time it's going to take. But also I do a lot of qualitative on these social artifacts, like comic books and things like that, or television series. And so you have to be very specific of what you're doing and identify. And people are like, oh, you just choose whatever, or at least that's what my students think of when they're doing that. But you have to clearly identify both inclusion and exclusion criteria. And that's really important when you are looking at what you're going to study. No matter if it is quantitative or qualitative, be specific.
Thank you. Dr. Giles.
Yeah, well, coming to UTC, I had an idea for how to start the lab and what to investigate, as most researchers in the sciences do when they first join faculty. And then you set up your lab, you establish your research capabilities, and you begin to foster collaborations to see how you can expand. And for my lab, I've always wanted to give the undergrads the most skills that I can give them. And so in my projects, I've told you I've go back and forth between bacteria because it makes the best projects. If I stay with the same bacteria, I might find myself giving a student one thing to do over and over and over again. And I prefer to let them be exposed to how to do multiple types of assays, how to isolate phospholipids, get into analysis, get into some bioinformatics research, and to run thin layer chromatography, to do the basic microbiology that we do every day in my lab. And so I like to diversify it. That's a lot what drives the topics I give students, is how can I give them, and it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes I just have to tell them, I've got 2 ideas. You know, one of them, you're going to be doing the same thing, a lot of the same thing over and over again. And sometimes the students love it and they're really good at it. But in terms of subject area, first, my research capabilities, how do I get money for it? And so I have to have a good pitch. And fortunately, some of mine is health related, so I can pitch it towards, can we use some of these fatty acid handling abilities to fight pathogens? And have been fortunate enough to establish collaborations in chemistry with Dr. Symes and engineering with Dr. Harris. Makes a really good team that after it's taken this about 8 years to now I feel like we're ready to really move forward instead of laterally, at least in my lab. I can move forward to more mechanisms that underlie how they're able to, more fundable questions. And so the collaborations are really important. And to also avoid competition, I would say. I mean, I'm not going to jump into E. coli and start doing all sorts of E. coli research because there's too many people doing it. And I try to find myself a niche that insulates me and my students from being scooped. And so far it's worked. And we just try to keep making a pitch for the significance and impact of what we do to keep moving forward.
Thank you. Dr. Z. Dr. Z.
So I took a slightly different approach from Dr. Garland when talking about the human research and did more of a Dr. Giles approach. When I think about developing subject criteria for my research, I thought about how do I develop what I'm going to research and what I'm going to do. And one of the reasons why UTC was so attractive to me from the hiring process was because it was a teaching focused school, but it still allowed me to do a fair amount of research. And one of the best things about this is, as Dr. Giles said, it wasn't a niche. I didn't have to find one thing and then just research that for the rest of my life. And so one of the things that I really pride myself on in the lab that actually Dr. Osborne co-runs with me is that we like to have the students lead. So what are they interested in? What can we help do to help kind of cultivate that particular interest? And then the research lab team kind of helps everyone work together. So Faith's now experienced a good chunk of our research lab meetings and good number of people in there. Everyone's typically doing their own project or they've kind of partnered up with somebody else, but it's things that they're interested in. So that's, and honestly, that really keeps our lab fresh with regards to ideas, because one, it allows students to have a say and input from everything. And also, as Dr. Giles said, they don't just do one specific thing for us and then, fly the coop, but rather, okay, how can you help develop a project, develop methodology? How can we help you analyze results? Write up the discussion and then eventually either publish or present it at an peer-reviewed conference or publication. I think I said publish and present. Regardless, so that's kind of the way that I look at it is, what do students want to research? How can we help best develop that research question or questions? And then how do we help them kind of develop along the entire research process so students get to experience every step of the way? But after their first semester, there's now new people in the lab and they can kind of help mentor younger students and new students as well. So that's kind of how I help develop subject criteria when I'm focused on student-focused research.
Thank you. Okay, next to the last question. So why is your research important? What are the possible real world applications? And our first person to answer is Dr. K.
Okay, so my research address health and lifestyle issues affecting individually with physical disabilities. So we are working with the veterans, we are working with several palsy kids, we are working for the athletes. So we try to make their life better. So that's why our research is important. So also as a former professional basketball coach, I work with the basketball players to improve their shoot and jump skills during 3-point range. So we did some research about this. We use like some balance board doing this. So it's some kind of like improvement studies for the athletes. So that's why I think that our research is important. So another part of the question, it's I think it was real world application. Yeah. So all of my research is real world application. For example, this one. So I can wear and we can use. So we are not working like theoretical side. We always making like practical. So that's why all of my research is including real time application.
Thank you. Dr. HB?
Yes, I would say my research is important because, like Dr. K, we work with people. And so no matter what your job is, what your age is, we really want people to have and lead a healthy lifestyle. And so I think this type of research will always keep people in public health and exercise science and health sciences gainfully employed now and in the future. And so I think that's why this type of research is important, because we're working with people and we want to develop best practices, evidence-based practices and methods that really support change in our community, not just one individual, but really all people. And the application to the real world is that I think students as an undergraduate or graduate student are learning very specific skills that they can then apply to their own life, but also to the lives of those around them. And so I think sounds like a lot of everybody's research is really skills-based. So once you leave UTC as an undergraduate student, you can really apply those critical thinking skills really in any setting or situation that ultimately helps people live healthier lives.
Thank you. And then Dr. Pyer.
Yeah, so you're going to get a double dip from Health and Human Performance on the importance of health here. I mentioned earlier that I started researching athletic performance, and I don't want to knock what Dr. K has done with basketball, three-point shot. That stuff is fun, and if I can still get somebody on a treadmill and run them as long and as fast as they can, I love to do it. But during my master's program, I was exposed to a lot of childhood physical activity and child obesity research, and kind of had a moment of like, this seems like it might do more for the world. I think we all know we've got a problem with childhood obesity. So I felt like I could really have more of a real world impact doing that. Then I always say, then making Michael Phelps a little bit faster was kind of my alternative career direction. As far as student learning and skills going out, a big thing, like I mentioned, we do is motivational interviewing training. And whether you work, as a clinician, that's an important skill to learn how to work with patients and talk about how to make healthy changes. But even just in your day-to-day lives, when I'm training students, I say, use these techniques the next time you're on the phone with your mom, and she's going to feel so listened to and like you care about what's happening in her life. There's a great YouTube video. It's about 1.5 minutes called "It's Not About the Nail" that I strongly encourage everybody to watch, just about how we listen and acknowledge when other people have something that they just really need to get off their chest. So I think that's important for our students, whether they continue in research or clinical or just conversations in the workplace moving forward. Real world application, again, I work with physical activity and childhood obesity. There's, I think, a pretty clear real world need for that one right now.
Thank you. What kind of response have you gotten to your research and your findings? Dr. Kim.
Yeah, this question is kind of very simple and in a way hard to answer. I mean, it is very obvious when the response I got is, oh, that's interesting, kind of attitude in a good positive way, or that's interesting, is it really, kind of response. So if I say, if the question is that, it's very simple as most word I heard is interesting. And then they go beyond, I really want to see what's actually realized interior, the patient's room look like. So they're kind of expecting actually realize the design, or that when I applied that specific design elements. But when I did this community housing survey, when I share my outcome, some people seems to feel kind of urgent. So something they had to do, improve their living conditions. So that's why I found that my research is valuable to either people get some positive or new, when they have new information first, especially the community housing survey, what I found, I did a satisfaction survey, and then overall outcome was, oh, they're good. They're pretty happy about their current condition, especially when we are talking about the underprivileged community in our town, but they say it's okay. That was surprising and interesting. So some people might seems to feel we do something to change their environment, but somehow they feel like it's okay. So there's a lot more deep inside some other factor that affect their response to the survey. But anyway, yeah, that is my the response I got from my research.
Thank you. And Dr. Harris, you have been waiting patiently since the first question, so you're up.
No pressure there, right? Well, so what kind of response have I gotten? Well, I've gotten everything. I've had people that thought it was really cool and they wanted to get involved. I've had people, especially reviewers, that hated it. And recently, I've had reviewers and other people that liked it. I think that the important thing is to take what you can from it, in terms of what's some sort of positive feedback that you can build on. So, for instance, when I first got to UTC, I just put together a half page of what my experience was and what my skills were in. And I just kind of put that out there to the research and sponsored programs office, and they just kind of distributed it to other people. And that's how I first met David. And we started a collaboration that really at the beginning was just trying to get some chemical engineering students into his microbiology lab. It was one of their lab classes. And it's grown all the way to, we're on a funded R15 together. And then David's putting in another one. In terms of people that have hated it, I've sent off several different ideas to NSF and other agencies, and they've come back. Some have slammed it, some have liked aspects of it, not liked other aspects of it. In that case, it was really kind of swallowing your pride and saying, okay, that's valid and I can do something about that. Either not valid or there's really nothing I can do about that. I'm just going to have to live with it, and then just try to keep improving. And I think that, that's what led to this RET award that I just got as PI right before tenure, thank God. But I had to take negative criticism and what would be lackluster responses and keep coming back and being willing to, to experience that again if I had to until I got the response that I was looking for. So I've seen it all.
Well, thank you. That is all the organized questions. And now is the time for us to open it up, or, if anyone has any questions, you can type it in the chat or you can unmute yourself. And I will open this up to the researchers as well, because I saw a lot of people that are kind of interested in other people's research. So if you'll defer to the students first, but we are giving it a little bit of time to see if anybody has any questions. It looks like we actually lost some of the students who had joined us at the beginning. So now I have a lot of pressure on the two who are here.
They had a bad internet connection. They emailed me and said they got kicked off. So maybe they'll be back.
Okay. So this was really interesting, though. I would say this is by far something that I think more faculty should participate in, just because it was neat to hear what everyone's doing and realizing that when you think about a certain discipline, that's not necessarily what they're doing. Like it could be something different. So yeah. Faith or Patrick, do either of you guys have questions?
I don't. Rather, do you guys have any questions for me as the student researcher?
Yes, I was going to ask, can we hear a little bit about Faith's research? It sounds really interesting.
So I am in the ISWAG lab with Dr. Z. She's amazing. We have weekly meetings about what each researcher is doing, but me personally, I chose to talk about something that was personal to me. And when I was interviewing with Dr. Z, she was like, yeah, of course, like no big deal. She was open to what I liked and what I found an interest in, especially like what is going on with the political climate of this year. And also with the research that I'm finding is that I have found that it's not just happening here at UTC, but it's happening everywhere. And it's just like, so since it's happening, what is like, what can we do about it? What will anybody do about it? It's kind of similar to what you are doing, Ms. Pyer or Dr. Pyer, of with obesity. Like we know that it's a thing, but are people still going to listen? No. And like, that's like what I've come to realize is like, people aren't going to listen, but you have to like make them listen, like, get something to get them going, especially towards students of color here on campus.
And Faith is a great example that you don't have to do science like when you think of like biology, chemistry, no offense, Dr. Giles and Dr. Potts, when you're wanting to go to medical school. That's Faith's plan, is to go to med school, and I know she's going to be successful. I'm a little biased, but it's okay. But she's doing research that's interesting to her, that's not necessarily what you would think of in a cookie cutter, like that's what a med student would research, but it's going to make her such a fantastic doctor, and really make her just give her patients another level of care. So. Good point, Faith. You have a whole slew of.
I'm wondering if we've made some new collaboration connections now that people have met people on campus that they've never met before. So this was really interesting to me. We want to be respectful of your time, and since we don't seem to have any other questions right now, we both want to thank you immensely. You will get an official copy of a thank you on a letterhead that will copy your department heads, so that there'll be a record of our gratefulness, but also of the time that you spent and devoted to this, and we really appreciate it. So if no one has anything else, I think that we will close up. Teresa, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I have one announcement. So Dr. HB and I have been co-collaborating on a diversity series this semester, and it has been really, really fun. Faith's been there, I think, for most of them, but it's called Mox Move Forward, a discussion and application of diversity in healthcare. And we actually have another event tomorrow. It starts at 5 p.m. and runs till 7. And if you're interested, I can definitely send you the Zoom link. But we're going to talk about why diversity and inclusion is essential in healthcare. And we have Shannon Colvin, who is the program coordinator, I believe is her title, for the public health program. She's also a physician's assistant. And then we have a public health graduate student that's going to join the conversation and talk about diversity in healthcare. So join us if you would like. It's been a fun time. And that's all I have.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I called on some of my friends for this, so, but it didn't burn any bridges. And then I also invited new people I'd never met. So thank you for agreeing to join us, even though I hadn't met you before. So we really appreciate it. And we know that this will be really valuable, even for the students who will view this later. This will be posted on a YouTube channel. So you will be able to, if you want to reference someone to this, we'll send you the link. Teresa will send you the link once it's posted on YouTube. So. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.